And I wish I had historic NBA Finals odds up in front of us, or opening odds. The big thing that comes to my mind is the mad genius that Rick Carlisle is. If you and I were having a pod in 2011 going into the Heat Mavs finals, we probably would have been like, hey, man, like this Heat team, they got the big three and whatever. But Rick Carlisle is this mad genius. And I'm so curious to see what he has got up his sleeve for the Thunder. Maybe there are things, and maybe in the back of his mind, he knew that this was a possibility. And there are things that he did not do during the regular season that he might be able to lock in and do during the postseason in a 7-game series. And something I kind of thought about with the Thunder during the year, and I noticed it because, sometimes in the regular season, there was like mini series where you play the same team back-to-back times, so like a Sunday and a Tuesday or whatever. Thunder had 2 of those. They had one against the Lakers. They had one against the Nuggets. And the second time they played, or one of those 2 games, they looked mortal. And they looked unbeatable in one, they looked mortal in the other. And it made me think that I'm not trying to discredit what the Thunder have done. They're having an historic season. They won 68 games. They've only lost 4 times going to the finals either. They're up to 80 wins. But I do think that maybe that this is a team that's really built to just take advantage of you, and you don't know what hits you. And by the time it hits you, they're on to the next game. And I wonder, and we saw it in the Nuggets series, and they dragged it out just because they were so talented, because Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. They were able to drag that series out. I wonder if now the Pacers having top 5-3 coach in the NBA, with this series being the way it is, if there are some things that they can exploit that drags this series longer than everybody expects it to, because most people think, and the odds suggest, that Indiana does not have a chance. But one thing we've learned about Indiana is when odds go against them this postseason, whether they're down 8 or 17 or whatever it is, don't count them out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually pulled up the odds just because I was curious. They have the highest odds, or they had the highest preseason odds of any team that has reached the finals, and that's including the 2023 Heat that made the run as the number 8 seed. They were plus 660 going in. Plus 6,600 going into this season to win the NBA Finals, and that's a team that made it to the conference finals last year, and they still had that long shot of odds. But at the same time, like as you're talking about that, I'm kind of thinking through the series that OKC played. And I'm not by any means saying that, they had a cakewalk to the finals. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that in every series, the other guys did not step up. Like in the Nuggets, it was a whole lot of Jokic. You got some Jamal Murray. There was like maybe one good MPJ game. Aaron Gordon was good before he got hurt, but there wasn't a lot of consistency. In the Wolves series, like Julius Randle fell off a map after playing the best basketball we've seen him play in his career. Anthony Edwards wasn't necessarily, scoring at the rate that we had seen him score all season long. And, that's obviously a credit to the Thunder's defense as well. But when it comes to the other guys, like Nikhil had one big game. He had a stinker in the last game. Naz Reid was never really consistent all playoffs. Jaden McDaniels had some big scoring performances. Didn't necessarily happen against OKC. And again, I want to reiterate that like OKC's defense does that to you. But part of what makes Indiana so good is they have so many different guys that can beat you. And I do want to bring up Benedict Mathurin because he is someone who I give him a ton of credit. Like he had kind of almost fallen out of the rotation for the Pacers at one point in the playoffs. And then he finally started to find a groove at the end of that series. Is he somebody that can carry that momentum over into this series and become, a major X factor off the bench? I already talked about Andrew Nembhard and how he might have an opportunity, depending on what his defensive assignment is. He might have an opportunity to get back into a rhythm as a scorer. Aaron Nesmith, we saw what he did in game 1. He I think that ankle started bothering him a little bit and it threw him out of a rhythm, at least as a shooter and a scorer. But, he's someone else who we know he can get going. Miles Turner is another one. Like he didn't necessarily have his best series towards the back end against the Knicks, but he is somebody who, again, he can bring guys like Isaiah Hartenstein, Chet Holmgren out from underneath the rim and force them to defend further away from the basket, knock down some 3-point shots, open everything up for everybody else on that team to, score on drives, Tyrese Haliburton, drive and kick, things like that. So, they do have a lot of different guys who can beat you. And the Thunder haven't necessarily faced that type of adversity yet in this postseason. So I'm very curious to see if the Pacers can exploit something that the Thunder haven't necessarily seen. And that is just having a number of different guys who can put up numbers, who can put up points to make life difficult for them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's the interesting thing about Indiana. sets them apart, and we've seen it this playoffs. And you rang off the names, right? Like, I trust any of those guys. Not necessarily I trust or I expect them to, but it would not surprise me if any of those guys you named come in and have a big game. TJ McConnell has had games where he's just an irritant and he's getting into the teeth of the defense and he's finishing around the rim as well. And he's creating and he's doing things like that. So the cool thing about both of these teams, and we talked about the depth and going into that Knicks conference finals, I pointed that out. And I think you agree with me, just that the Pacers' ability to play 10, 11 guys sets them apart. Well, the Thunder do the same thing. And I don't necessarily know. I think it's different in that the Thunder usually keep their rotation to 9, but they have 11 guys ready to go. Whereas the Pacers, a lot of times, are going to play 10 or 11. And guys just might get a few minutes like here and there. Like Ben Shepherd might come in and make a few threes. And it's like, oh, all right, he's got it tonight or he doesn't have it tonight. And it's a bigger discussion that we can kind of take it to after this. But I do think that it's just something that maybe the league becomes more of a copycat league. And this is hard to replicate. But thinking about how these teams were built and thinking about the composition of these teams, I guess looking into that and what ways the series could trend. And I guess to look at it from a lens of, okay, nobody's giving the Pacers a chance. But what do we think in looking at this and how the Pacers can extend this series and maybe do what people are basically saying is impossible?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because every year when two teams make the finals, it is a copycat league. You do see teams try and replicate what those teams, like different ways that those teams found success. How do you find that within your own roster? And I do think that this is a step towards like super teams kind of, a lot of that has to do with like tax stuff and the aprons and everything like that. But like, I do think that there is like a blueprint to follow here. In terms of like having like one guy, one like offensive engine like Shea, like Tyrese Halliburton that you can build around, and then having a number of different guys around him that can, do different things, whether it's shoot, score, defend. Like you want to build these rosters in a way that when you're subbing one guy out, the guy that's coming in for him is able or capable of doing something similar. Like they can fill a similar role. They can, take on a similar defensive assignment. There's like an interchangeability. And I think that like these two teams, more than any other team in the league this year, they represent that. Like we saw in the Western Conference Finals, like Mark Daigneault hadn't played Kenrich Williams in it felt like 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden he was playing like a major role in that series against Minnesota because he liked that matchup against Julius Randle. Like the same way that we hadn't seen Tony Bradley, myself included, like I think there are a lot of people that didn't even know Tony Bradley was on the Pacers. All of a sudden,
it had been 2 years since he played in the league. It had been 2 years.
Yeah. And all of a sudden this guy is playing like very meaningful playoff minutes. You see Thomas Bryant get thrown in there. Like he was just a throw-in a deal at the trade deadline. And all of a sudden, Tony Bradley is dealing with a hip injury and Thomas Bryant comes in and he knocks down 3 threes in game 6 to like really swing the momentum of that game. So not only are these two really deep teams, but you have two coaches that aren't afraid to trust the guys and know that the guys that are on the bench are ready and available and they're going to step in and they're going to do their job. And that's, part of like the mad scientist, to use your words, like of both of these coaches, like from one game to the next, you could see a whole lot of Aaron Wiggins. You could see a whole lot of Kenrich Williams. And then in the next game, maybe it's Jalen Williams that's coming off the bench and giving them good minutes. Like you never know who you're going to see out of these two teams. But, in respect to the way that these rosters were built, you and I were talking about it a little bit before. I was like very intrigued to see if the way that these two teams were built were any different than some of the previous finals teams. And I went back and I did it out by hand, the last 10 teams to make the NBA finals. So over the last 5 years and on average, how those players were acquired. Was it via trade? Was it via draft? Was it via free agency? And the thing that stuck out to me about both OKC and Indiana, Indiana had 7 players that were drafted. Oklahoma City had 9 players that were drafted. That was a lot compared to the last 5 finals teams. On average, 10 teams total to make the last 5 finals, only had 4 players that were drafted. They had 3 players acquired via trade and 6 players acquired via free agency. So this feels like, again, like going into the whole second apron and free agency and the tax stuff and teams trying to get under the tax and all of that, like with the new CBA, like you really have to build these teams from within. It has to be through trade. It has to be through successful draft picks because, over the last 5 years, the two teams that had the most players acquired via trade to make the NBA Finals were the two teams that were in the NBA Finals last year, the Mavs and the Celtics. And then this year, you have the two teams that have the most players drafted on their roster to make the NBA Finals. It's Indiana and it's Oklahoma City this year. And like even just looking through some of the data, like 5 years ago, the Lakers team that won the championship, they only had one player on their roster that was drafted on their team. 9 players were acquired via free agency. So there really is a change in tide where it's like you're not just going to be able to sign random players, role players, guys who can play meaningful minutes for you in free agency to make a major impact. You have to have success through the draft. You have to make the right trades. And both these teams have done that in bringing in Shea. They signed Isaiah Hartenstein. Like that's like one of the one-offs. But other than that, it's like the Pacers, like they really nailed the draft. They brought in Pascal via trade. They brought in Tyrese Halliburton via trade. So it's kind of interesting to see that the construct of these rosters is significantly different because of the way the CBA is impacted.
Yeah, I was doing some research on how these teams were built as well, and some crazy things that stand out to me. One, and I saw somebody point this out, and I forget who it was. So if you're out there listening, forgive me, please. But on Twitter, both Shea and Tyrese Halliburton, kind of similar to what we're seeing now with the NFL thing with quarterbacks on their rookie contracts being the cheat code to win a Super Bowl or whatever. Now they're making a lot of money, Tyrese and Shea are, but they're still on their rookie extensions versus being on a Supermax extension. We talked about Shea, that $75 million annually that's coming up down the line. Might be harder to build a championship around that, but right now I don't know exactly what he's making. I think it's somewhere between 40 and 50, a little bit easier to navigate around that. Same thing with Tyrese Halliburton. But also crazy, Miles Turner being the longest tenured player for either team, been in Indiana since 2015. But also, did you know that Benedict Mathurin is the Pacers' highest draft pick since 1988?
I did not know that. I did
crazy,
not know
right?
that. That is crazy.
And he was 6th overall. They picked Rick Smith 2nd overall in 88, and that worked out pretty well for them. But for that Pacers team, it kind of just speaks to where they are. Like they're always a team that's like either like in the late lottery or they're in the playoffs. Like they made the playoffs a bunch of times with Reggie Miller and Rick Smith. They made the playoffs a bunch of times with Paul George. Like Paul George was the 10th pick. Miles Turner was like 10th or 11th as well. So they have not picked inside the top 5 since 88. And here they are back in the finals for a second time in that time span. I know that's 37 years is a long time, but still that stands out to me. Obviously, Shea, the best player in the series, was taken after 10th as well. Jalen Williams was taken 12th in the draft. And it's crazy to think about how the ball bounces a couple ways and things go in your favor because that Jalen Williams pick belonged to the Clippers. And 2022 was the year that the Clippers were the 8th seed. The same year that Anthony Edwards and Pat Bev jump on the scores table, Clippers lose. They go back to LA. Paul George gets COVID. They lose to the Pelicans. They don't make the playoffs. The Thunder get a lottery pick. They pick 2 and 12. They take Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. And here you are, Jalen Williams, 3 years in, all defense, all star, all NBA. And it's just crazy to think that, and obviously the Paul George trade preceded that, and the Paul George trade brought in Sabonis to Indiana, who ended up bringing Tyrese Halliburton to Indiana as well. So all these different moving pieces and things of that nature that kind of go into it that makes it interesting to look at just the anatomy of an NBA Finals roster or these two NBA Finals rosters. And I am very curious to see, because I know we'll talk about it down the line in a few weeks. The draft is on the way. We're 3 weeks away from the draft as we speak right now. So we'll see some teams maybe try to make those moves to try to build their teams and build that depth. Because I think the biggest takeaway, and this applies to both the Thunder and the Pacers, is just how much better the modern day role player is than, and no knock on anybody. I just think it's like a higher skill level across the board. 7th, 8th man nowadays is just a super talented player. When you talk about Caruso and you talk about, Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins and these guys who come off the bench and do these things, as much as we talked about the guys of the Pacers, the Thunder's guys have the capability to do this with Case and Wallace as well. So I'm really curious to see that chess match in between the lines with those depth pieces, and it all goes back to how things were assembled.
Yeah, and I mean, like as you're going through all of that, and you're talking about like Benedict Mathurin being their highest pick, it's like it goes beyond hitting the top picks. Like Andrew Nembhard was a 2nd round pick. Like finding those little like diamonds in the rough, like that makes a major difference, especially under the new CBA. It's so important. That's why like around trade deadline time, like now you're seeing like players traded for like 5 second-round draft picks. Mm-hmm. It's because like you can find a diamond in the rough like that and you don't have to pay them much money. So that means you can pay your top end guys even more. And that's where like you get into a situation like Boston's in right now, where they have two guys that are making $1 billion combined, and now you have to figure out the rest of the roster around them. Like, yes, all right, you've brought in guys like Hauser and Cornette on cheap money, and you nailed the Peyton Pritchard pick, like whatever. Like, but like the way that you're building these teams, like you need guys on rookie deals that are able and capable of making an impact. And like, I mean, that's a lot of what the Thunder are doing. Like you said, with J-Dub and Chet. In the Pacers, it's a little bit different. I mean, they brought some guys in via trade, like, the guys that are actually in their rotation. I mean, a handful of them are drafted, some of them are via trade. But I feel like when you're looking at these two rosters, like it's not like these massive, like, I go back to like those like Warriors Cavs finals, right? Where it's like, the name of literally every single player that steps on the floor. It's, even beyond like LeBron, Kyrie, and Kevin Love, like, J.R. Smith, Tristan Thompson, like the list goes on and on, like obviously on the Warriors side too. But like in this finals, like this is like a real like ball knowers, like, Hooper's dream type finals, because if you've been paying attention all year long, who these guys are. And how good they are, and how much they contribute to success and winning and all of those things. But, if you're just someone that's passively watching the NBA, you're going to see some guys check in on the floor that you've never even heard of. And you're going to be like, where the hell did this guy come from? And that's because these teams have done such a good job of developing those types of players, putting them in roles to succeed and everything like that. So, it really is like, it feels like the same people that were complaining about like 4 straight Cavs Warriors finals are also the same people that are complaining about like, there's not enough superstar power in this year's finals. I want to see superstars, which like drives me crazy because, if we were to, flash back to the time that there was 4 straight Cavs Warriors finals, so many people were complaining there's not enough parity in the league. It's the same teams in the finals every year. You don't even have to watch the regular season. Well, this year is literally the exact opposite of that. If you were watching the regular season all year, you have seen that the Thunder have been the best team in the NBA all season long. No team, including the playoffs, has more wins than the Pacers other than OKC since the start of the new year. They were rolling in the second half of the season. Now we're seeing the 2 best teams in the league for sure facing off in the NBA Finals. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, it's going to be great basketball. And one last thing on the draft picks, too. I think that stockpiling a bunch of picks, you can afford to, I'm not going to fully say whiff, but Jarris Walker has not yet been what the Pacers expect to be. I know he's battling an injury right now, but that's still to be determined. The same thing for Ousmane Dieng in OKC, right? So like they just have so many picks and so much draft capital that sometimes they can afford to take a swing and be patient with those guys, because Jarris Walker in year 3 or year 4 could click. And same thing for Dieng, right? But just thinking about that as well. But to your last point, I'm super excited. Just like the quality of basketball I expect to see in this series. I think it's going to be closer than most people are predicting because of how good the Pacers have been in the calendar year of 2025. And my biggest hope is that we get just an absolute banger in game 1. So the people who may or may not have continued to tune in after game 1 stay locked in with what's going on. Thanks for checking out NBA Sound System Canada on YouTube. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe below and find us wherever you get your podcasts. And on Instagram, we have weekly episodes and bonus content throughout the week.